Welcome to the Emisarios Unidos de Luz channel. If you enjoy this near-death experience story, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Now let's start with the story. Back in the 50s, before our high school graduation, our class decided to go on a day trip to a nearby river. It was a beautiful summer day, but the water in the river was cold because the water in that northern state doesn't warm in the summer. There by the river, we ate lunch, and afterwards, some of my friends decided to play on a pontoon that was floating not too far from the edge of the river. My friends were having fun, and they were waving at me to come and join them, but I really didn't want to get wet because I found the water to be too cold. Their incessant cajoling managed to convince me, and in my impetuous fervor to join them, I took a running dive into the water. Overwhelmed by the sudden change in temperature, I began swimming frantically towards the pontoon in an attempt to acclimatize more rapidly, but as I reached the halfway point, I started to get severe cramps in my calf muscles, and those cramps stopped me from being able to kick. I then attempted to tread water with my arms and hands, but as I became increasingly exhausted, my body became progressively submerged until my head was no longer above water. Realizing that few options remained to me, I began to panic, and in my frantic state, I began to choke and swallow water. With the last ounce of strength that remained, I managed to launch my body above the water to wave to my friends on the pontoon, but my friends, not realizing that I was in trouble, only returned the wave. Utterly exhausted, I let my limp body fall deeper and deeper underwater until I became entangled in the weeds at the bottom of the lake. With my body screaming for air and with no recourse remaining, I accepted that I was about to drown. "Jay, stop fighting and relax," I heard a voice say in my head suddenly. "I can't. I have to get my head above water or I'll drown," I replied. "Jay, you really need to relax and let go," the voice asserted. "I can't," I replied. "Just let go, Jay. Everything is going to be alright," the voice repeated. "Okay then, but only if you can reassure me that I will be okay," I replied. "If you let go, everything will be fine," the voice confirmed. "Okay," I replied. It was at that moment that I separated from my body. Then next thing I knew, I was traveling in a tunnel, and in that tunnel I was in complete ecstasy as unconditional love embraced me and pervaded my being. While traveling in the tunnel, I was able to look down to see my body at the bottom of the river, but as I looked upon it, I felt quite indifferent about it and about my life on earth. In the experience of unconditional love, I was at home, and the experience of that love made everything else seem insignificant. Suddenly I saw an intensely bright light ahead of me, and I was being drawn to that light as if by a powerful magnet. I was very near the light when I suddenly found myself at the center of a giant sphere. Inside the sphere, I was surrounded by what appeared to be movie screens, and those screens played back the events of my various past lives. As I watched the moments of my multiple lives play back on the screens, I became immersed to the degree where I felt as if I was reliving those moments, and I was also able to experience those moments from the perspective of the other people involved. As I digested all that I relived, I began to communicate with the light about the events of my various lives, those lives that were lived on Earth, on other planets, and in other realms. It felt as if I had been watching those screens for months, even though, on Earth, only a matter of minutes had passed. Suddenly, I was back in the tunnel, and I could see that the light was right next to me. "Jay, I love you. Jay, we love you," I heard the light say, and it was at that very moment that I was instantly transported to a realm of light. In that realm, I saw a trillion other lights just like me. "Welcome home, Jay," they said in unison. It was then that I became one with the light. I was a part of that unity or oneness. I was one, but I was also one of many, and in that experience of oneness, I experienced an ecstasy that cannot be expressed in words. In that unified state of being, all knowledge was readily known to me, such that there was nothing that was unknown to me. We grow up associating God with serious things or things of great importance, and we don't usually think of God as a power with a sense of humor, but in the light, I experienced the frivolous side of God, and I found that the light has a fantastic sense of humor. During my life review, the light teased me about things that I took too seriously at the time. "Look how upset you got over something so unimportant," the light would comment. "Why don't you lighten up a bit? Or why didn't you have more fun while you're on Earth?" the light would ask. "You may as well, since you're only going to be there for a short time. Besides, it's all an illusion, think of it as a play like you're playing a game," the light would say. "There are 8 million actors on Earth, and they're all playing a role. They distinguish themselves and each other along the lines of religion, race, and sex, but once the costume is removed, the play is over, and you're back in the light. You soon realize that there is no difference between one and another. You realize that we're made out of the same stuff and that there isn't any difference between you and me or between you and anybody else," the light explained in its characteristic levity. On Earth, people are born in various bodies and in various circumstances to experience a side of life that can be known but cannot be experienced in the light. Everyone has their own unique vibration, which they lower in order to be born on Earth, to experience life in the physical sense, and to express their uniqueness. The individual's experience on Earth becomes part of the collective experience, and the collective experience is that body of knowledge that everyone has access to and upon which everyone draws. Thus, every individual experience contributes to the whole, and everything that exists, that ever exists, and that will exist is truly that oneness. It felt as if I had spent hundreds of years in unity with the light, yet time held no meaning in that realm or in that state of oneness. In the light, there is no hierarchy, no judgment, and no separation. There is only the ever new, ever happy, ever exciting, ever evolving experience of oneness. Jay, you have to go back, the light suddenly said to me. No way. I'm not going back, I replied to the light. Jay, you have to go back, the light insisted. There's no reason for me to go back to that planet. I'm home, I asserted. Jay, you're going back, the light said for the third time. Suddenly I was back in my body once again, and after experiencing the ultimate freedom in the spirit form, being back in the confines of the human body was the most horrible experience imaginable. I didn't want to return, and even today I wish I had never returned. My friends rescued me from the bottom of the river, and I regained consciousness after they pumped water out of my lungs like they used to do back then. Jay, tell us what it felt like to drown, they asked me. I can't remember anything, I replied at the time, as I didn't think there was any point in giving an account of an experience that everyone would conclude was a hallucination. My NDE happened almost 70 years ago, and yet the experience of joy and ecstasy remains vivid to me to this day. I never spoke of this to anyone for almost 30 years. And back in the 1950s, there wasn't even a word or category for what I experienced. The concept of a near-death experience wasn't defined until the late 1970s by Dr. Raymond Moody in his book Life After Life. I cried when I read his book some 25 years after my NDE, because I could finally acknowledge to myself that my experience was indeed real, and in acknowledging that my experience was a real experience, I began to remember the forgotten details of that experience. Today I'm still waiting to go back home, and I know that it will happen soon, but in the meantime, I'm doing all that I can to lighten up, have fun, and play the game, just as the light suggested. Being happy, being silly, being humorous, and being joyful makes life more enjoyable, and it makes life more like the experience I remember when I was one with the light. The light explained to me that the reason we're on Earth in the first place is to be joyful and experience joy, and the way to do it is by choosing to love rather than hate, by performing simple acts that bring joy to the lives of others, since we are all one.